Hi, welcome to Feed Your Soul. I am Melinda, and this is our series on the Torah portions, designed to help believers in Jesus get to know our foundations of our faith better than we do, to understand what the later part of the book is built upon, right? These are our foundations. And I have found that a lot of us don't know enough about what the book says. So here I am trying to share what I know with all of you, and I'm glad you're here. This week's portion is on Chaya Sarah. It is the life of Sarah, or Sarah's life in Hebrew, and it is found in Genesis 23 through 25. We're also going to look at Isaiah 60 and Hebrews 11. Traditionally, the Torah portions are something that is Hebraic, Jewish in origin. It's just the traditional way to kind of carve up, portion out these first five books of the Bible to be read over the year. So traditionally, there are some prophet portions that go along with the Torah portion, half Torah, it's called. But sometimes I will change it out for my own personal preference about what I want to cover. So Hebrew Isaiah 60 is not the traditional prophet portion for this week, but I thought it fit better for what I want to focus on. So, and then Hebrews 11 is part of the New Testament, where I'll just pull in things from the New Testament each week. Sometimes they're kind of traditional, other times they're just what I want to talk about. So glad you're here. It's later in the day than I wanted it to be. So we're having some glare back here. So I might pull myself off camera, but we'll see how it goes. All right, let's get started. Oh, before we get started, this beautiful watercolor picture on your screen here is of Sarah, Sarah, and it was painted by Sarah Beth. You can find her at sarahbethart.com. And she has beautiful portraits of many women in the Bible, along with other scenes and things. Her watercolors are beautiful. So check her out. And let's get started in Genesis 23. So interestingly enough, the portion begins with Sarah dying. It's called The Life of Sarah, or Sarah Lived, and it starts out with Sarah's passing. Um, so Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land, and he said to them, If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat me, Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as a property for a burying place. Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in at the gate of his city. No, Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land and said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, But if you will hear me, I give the price of the field according. I lost my spot, sorry. My puppy's barking, if you can hear him. But if you will hear me, I give the price of the field, accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, My lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver? What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. And Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron in Machpelah, which was east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field throughout its whole area was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites, before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property for a burying place by the Hittites. So that might have seemed like a lot to say. Abraham bought this field to bury Sarah. Here is my artist's rendition of the field and the cave that Abraham bought from Ephron. But I think if we look a little bit at the subtext here, Abraham knew that this was the promised land, that God himself had promised this space to Abraham, that he was really the rightful inhabitant of the space, his children would be, right? But he didn't go in there and even tell this to them. He didn't say, hey, God said I was going to be having this land, so I want it to bury my wife here. He offered to pay for it. He didn't want it given as a gift because he wanted to own the space where Sarah was buried. And in an honor and shame culture, which the ancient Near East very much is, and still is, a lot of the Near East, Middle East is still very honor, shame focused. A lot of the world is actually. Some of us in the West, in North America, don't really understand what an honor, shame culture is. Because when we think of someone honorable, we think of a morally good person who would like run into a burning building to save someone, or who someone who stands up and gives their seat to a pregnant woman, or things of that nature. But when we're talking about an honor and shame culture, you're really born with honor, and honor is a finite resource that if you were to give up some honor, it's almost like you have less. If you give someone else honor, you're giving from like a finite resource. So when Ephron is offering to give this part of his land to someone as important as Abraham, and yes, he had, people know he's a man of God. He's been called a prophet. Pharaohs in Egypt know him. We have kings of all over know who Abraham is. So he is an honorable man in this culture. Having him be someone who uses your land and your country is an honorable thing. Selling it to him is a little less honorable. You're giving away some of your wealth, some of your land. So there's that push and pull there, right? And then there's also the idea that Abraham does not want to be a guest here. He knows that it's his promised land, but he wants to pay a fair price for the portion of land that he is utilizing at this point in time. He doesn't want to do it by force, but he doesn't also want to do it by gift, a gift that could potentially at some point be taken away from him. So I think there's a lot to kind of think about there, how Abraham treated this promised land. So we should keep in mind that it wasn't by force. He knew the promise to come, and he was going to have faith that that would be what happened in the future. So here we are at Genesis 24. And I'm just getting some glare here. I might jump off camera. Let's see how it goes. The sun is bouncing off the computer into my eyeball. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. But I will go to my country and to my kindred, and take a wife for my son Isaac." The servant said to him, "Perhaps the woman may not be willing to come follow me to this land. Must I take your son back to the land from which you came?" Abraham said to him, "See to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you, and he shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. It's an interesting way to make an oath, right? Under the thigh. This may be Eleazar. He's not named, the servant, but he's the oldest of the household. We know that Eleazar was a trusted servant of Abraham's. So perhaps this is Eleazar, probably. And Eleazar comes from the Azer Kenegdo, right? That's that Azer, that help. Um, so Eleazar is God is my help, or help from God. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when the women go out to draw water. And he said, "O Lord, God of my master, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young women to whom I shall say, 'Please let down your jar that I may drink,' and who shall say, 'Drink, and I will water your camels,' let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master." So Eleazar, or Abraham's servant, comes with 10 camels. There's only one on your screen, but it was 10 camels. And what he prays is for the God of Abraham to show him the right woman by having her volunteer not just him a drink, but to water all of his camels. And I just want to stop for a moment and remind people how much camels drink, if you don't know. I meant to look up the exact gallons, but I know it's a lot, right? After they've been walking through like desert, they get thirsty and they can drink a ton of water and hold so much water. So watering 10 camels is a pretty big feat. And it wouldn't be like this woman didn't have other things to do, right? So this was going to be an act of kindness and service and hospitality. And this was the signal that Eleazar had asked for, that this would be the woman to be Isaac's wife. So let's meet Isaac's wife here. Before he had even finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water to drink from your jar." And she said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water. And she drew for all of his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels, and said, "Please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She added, "We have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night." The man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and faithfulness towards my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman. Then the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. So we're going to just take an interlude here. There's a whole nother paragraph or two that go over what happens next, right? Rebecca goes and tells her mother, her brother Laban comes out to get the scoop, what's going on. And Eleazar goes through this whole recap of what we just read there. There's some key differences in the retelling of the story to what just happened. So look through and see if you can find some differences. But they decide, yeah, okay, this sounds like this is going to be the man for our Rebecca, and Eleazar wants to go right away. Maybe they spend the night, hard to say, but Eleazar doesn't want to stick around very long. But Laban says, stay 10 days. Let's get to know you. Let's get to know one another. Let's hang out. And Eleazar was like, no, we would just want to go. So that's where we pick up a few verses later in verse 57. They said, let us call the young woman and ask her, right? So do we want to go now? Let's ask her. She had some autonomy here. She could have said no. And they called Rebecca and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. Then Rebecca and her young women arose and rode on the camels and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebecca and went his way. Now Isaac had returned from Beer la Haroi, right? That's that well of the God who sees, that Hagar named, and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes when she saw Isaac. She dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, it is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all these things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. A few things here, right? It's hard for our Western 21st century dwellers to think on arranged marriages in this way. Someone they've never met and they get married and there you go, right? I think this is a recap. It's a very short retelling of what happened. I would bet there was some time for Isaac and Rebecca to get to know one another. But this talks about grief, right? That Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. He's grieving his mother. He's missing her. He's a grown man, much grown man, a very much grown man, but missing his mother. Another kind of concept here that I think we might read right past is that he's moving into his mother's tent, right? This idea that our young people grow up and move away and go get independent really quickly is something that's rather new in history, right? Families stayed together. They were intergenerational, and young people lived at home and began to contribute to that home, however big that home became, until it became a clan. And then at some point, people needed to split off and get their own space. But I just wonder, do we have unrealistic expectations sometimes for our young people, expected to be alone and start their own lives so young? It's not what it used to be like. Anyway, that's an aside. But it did say that Isaac took Rebecca, became her husband, and he loved her, right? She became his wife. He loved her. And so although it's an arranged marriage, the Bible goes out of its way to say that he loved her. And so this was a marriage of care. And even though it was arranged, there was still love. I think that's lovely. So now we're over in Genesis 25. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Letushim, and Leumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Bida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward toward the east country. So this wasn't just Isaac and Ishmael, right? Abraham wound up having 6 other sons. So he had 8 sons, if I counted correctly. And he provided for them. It says he gave gifts to his concubines' children, which I imagine is Hagar and Keturah. But to Isaac, who was going to get this firstborn blessing, this passing down of all of what Abraham knew and had was going really to Isaac. But it doesn't mean that he had interactions with his other sons. And we'll see in a moment that Ishmael wasn't out of the picture either. That he comes back, he buries Abraham with Isaac. So we'll get there. So that brings us to a little interlude where fitting right into this section here, after we talk about Keturah's children, and before we get to the death of Abraham, there is a little interlude that I want to talk to you about. So next week, we'll discuss Isaac and Rebecca and the children they have. They wind up having twins, Jacob and Esau, right? We know Esau is the one with the hair on his head, and Jacob does not have hair. You find that out next week when there's some descriptions about these 2 sons. So there seems to be some strangeness that goes on between Rebecca and Jacob, and not kind of, but really deceiving Isaac. And we don't know why. And there was no information given really. And it leaves people wondering what was happening here? Why was this happening? But if you look in the book of Jubilees, which we've talked about a few times on this channel, the book of Jubilees is an extra biblical book that is not in our Northern American, Western Christian, Protestant canon, but it is in other canons. And it had been a part of the scriptures that early Christians had read from. Ideas in the book of Jubilees were definitely repeated in the New Testament. So many people feel like the book of Jubilees is scripture, some do not. But there are so many details in the book of Jubilees about things that just feel like they're missing from Genesis, that you're like, why? If I could just have a little more information, I could make sense of this. Well, a lot of that information is in the book of Jubilees. It is the book to be said to have been given to Moses on the mountain by angels. And it's a fascinating read. So in the book of Jubilees, we get this whole story. It's really like 4 or 5 chapters that take place from the death of Sarah through Abraham's death, rather than just this little section here in Genesis. Abraham was alive and interacted with Jacob and Esau. And we don't get any of that if we just read Genesis. And Abraham knew what kind of people, what kind of humans these sons were growing up to be. And he very much wanted to make sure his legacy was taken forth through Jacob. And he said that. And he told Rebecca that Jacob needed to be the one who took over his line, right? That the blessed nations would need to come through Jacob and not Esau. And it wasn't just about, you'll see, Esau was a man of the field and Jacob was kind of a man at home who liked to read and hung out in the tent, probably hung out with mom more. It wasn't just because of their dispositions. One liked to read and the other didn't. It was their character. There was a difference in character, and Abraham saw it, and he saw that Isaac didn't see it. So if you have time or interest, read through the book of Jubilees, 18 through 23, and we'll just read a little bit now, and we'll go over this more in depth next week because it really, I guess, fits the portion better there. This portion breaks up in a strange spot. So I just wanted to give you a little teaser for what we'll talk about more in depth next week. So Jubilees 19, the youths grew, and Jacob learned to write, but Esau did not learn, for he was a man of the field and a hunter, and he learned war, and all his deeds were fierce. Abraham loved Jacob, but Isaac loved Esau. And Abraham saw the deeds of Esau, and he knew that in Jacob should his name and offspring be called. He called Rebekah and gave commandment regarding Jacob, for he knew that she too loved Jacob much more than Esau. He said to her, "My daughter, watch over my son Jacob, for he shall take my place on the earth. He shall be a blessing throughout the children of men, for the glory of all the offspring of Shem." So we see here, he references Shem, he references commandments. Abraham wants to make sure what is being passed on from all the way back from Noah, right? Shem's son, all all the way back to really the garden. What did Adam know of God? What did Adam pass on to Seth? What did Seth pass on? Right? We know Abraham went and gave tithe to Melchizedek, who was a priest. There was a priesthood at this point in time. This priesthood wasn't about necessarily family lines or eldest or genealogy, but it was about who was righteous and who was righteous in their time. And so Melchizedek, the righteous king, righteous priest, whoever that was, maybe it was Shem, Noah's son at the time. If you look at the genealogies that come up at different times in the book of Genesis, I believe they're there to show the priesthood really being handed down to the next son, so that the ways of God could be known and that there would be someone to teach the next generation. And oftentimes we think about the priesthood just kind of springing up out of nowhere in the book of Leviticus, right, with the tribe of Levi and Moses and Aaron. But there was a priesthood before. We have sacrifices being given, right? Even Cain and Abel were giving sacrifices, bringing sacrifice. And then Noah is sacrificing to God on altars. And so is Abraham. So we can find these priestly behaviors, doing the ways of God, bringing him sacrifices, other people coming to him, to them, to know wisdom and the ways of the Lord. So this is what Abraham was looking to pass on, and he needed to make sure it went on to the right son, right? So he's calling Jacob his son. And we talked about this before, how non-specific some of these relationships are. A sister or a niece can be called like a sister. A son or a grandson can be called a son. A daughter-in-law is called a daughter. So just to keep in mind that this ancient Near East culture wasn't very specific in their family names, labels. But Abraham wanted to make sure that Jacob was the one who got the blessing. So as you're reading next week's Torah portion, keep that in mind, or else the whole thing seems very convoluted and strange. So here's my rendition of the boys. Here we have Esau out in being a man of war out in the field, and Jacob over here liking to read with his scroll. So, okay, moving on. So that brings us to the end of this portion, where it really just kind of wraps up the life of Abraham. And we're at Genesis 25:7. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah, his wife, after the death of Abraham. God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi, right? Again, that same well that Hagar spoke about. But we see Isaac and Ishmael are together burying their father. And if you read through the portion that I mentioned in Jubilees, you really see that Abraham gathered not just Isaac and Ishmael together, but all of their sons. So his sons, all 8 of them, their sons, so his grandsons, to tell them the ways of God. So there are a lot of details in there that are just really cool. And again, we'll pull in some more for next week. But Ishmael was involved in the life of Abraham. So we think about Hagar and Ishmael being sent out and them just kind of being alone in the world. But it was really, they got established elsewhere. Ishmael came back. He continued to be provided for in some way by Abraham, even though he wasn't getting the firstborn blessing. He wasn't getting the priestly blessing either, but he was involved in his father's life. And these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, who Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth. And I'm not going to try to read all of the rest of the names because I will stumble over them. But these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. And he settled over against all his kinsmen. So a lot went on, in the midst of these verses, right? Ishmael lived his whole life. Abraham died, but there was a whole lot that was going on before that. So we just need to think, like, Genesis is really a quick moving summary. And there are some details that don't exist in that text, but they are out there. There are other ancient writings that can fill in some details on what went on. So that brings us to our prophet portion, or our prophet pairing, and we are looking at Isaiah 60. Arise, arise, shine, for your light has come. And I have Hebrew there. If you're looking on the screen, it's because that was one of our helpful Hebrew words, and it's or. The light that has come is not, there's 2 kinds of lights mentioned in the beginning of Genesis, when light was created, and then there was also vessels of light, like sun, moon, and stars. So this light here, or, is light, illumination, right? It's not like a vessel of light. So arise and shine, for your light, or your illumination, has come, and the glory of Jehovah has risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you, and nations shall come to your light. Nations, the same word there, goyim, the same word that Abraham was promised, that nations would come from him. So think Abraham. Every time you see the word nations, think of Abraham's promise. So, and nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around and see. And they all gather together. They come to you. Your son shall come from afar, and your daughter shall be carried on the hip. Then you shall see and be radiant, and your heart shall thrill and exult, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. Violence no more shall be heard in your land, devastation or destruction within your borders. You shall call your walls salvation and your gates praise. So just pausing a moment, violence shall be no more on this promised land that we're discussing here. The light will come. No more will we need to rely on the sun and the moon for light, because God will be the light. Violence will be no more, and salvation will come. And I put what that is in Hebrew, because that was another one of our helpful Hebrew words. It's Yeshua. This is Jesus's name, right? The Hebraic name for Jesus is Yeshua, or maybe Yehoshua, but it means salvation, or God saves. The sun shall no more be your light by day, nor for brightness shall the moon give you light. But the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your sun shall no more go down, nor your moon withdraw itself. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your days of mourning shall be ended. Your people shall all be righteous, and they shall possess the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I might be glorified. The least one shall become a clan, and the smallest one a mighty nation. I am Jehovah. In its time, I will hasten it. This is a future prophecy, right? This is Isaiah warning what was going to happen, that both Israel and Judah would be taken from their land, but that it would return. They would return to a promised land. And this promised land is clearly in the future. It's clearly something that hasn't happened yet, right? There's a promised land that are promised to the people of God. It's promised to the people of God, and He will be their light, and there will be no more violence, and salvation will be its walls, right? This is future language. This is kingdom come. What we believe by faith will happen. It's not something that comes by force. It's not our force. It's a promise that is fulfilled. And I just want to liken that to the promise in which Abraham believed, right? Going back to last week's portion where we had the contrast between the child of promise and the child of flesh. And that's not to discount these human beings, Isaac and Ishmael, and say one was more than or less than. But one child came through a promise and nothing that Abraham and Sarah did. And the other promise came through their own human strivings to try to force the promise and the fulfillment of God's promises, right? So that's really the juxtaposition we see in a lot of the scriptures, the difference between the promise and faith and the works really of the flesh. What we're having faith in, what the promise we believe in is what is happening in the future. And it's not something we can force and push with our own hands. So it's just, this is what came to my mind in light of the current things going on in the world, right? What's going on in Israel right now with the terror and terroristic attacks is horrible. It's horrible. Destruction of life, murder, terrorism it's horrible. I think we all need to remember to pray over the people of God, to pray for peace, to pray that violence is no more, to pray that those who love the Lord will be protected and those who hate him will be stopped. And we also need to remember that we shouldn't get carried away in what we think prophecies are coming true, how we think the prophecies will happen. Because a lot of times when we let our own thoughts, interpret the promises of God, we tend to act on our human fleshly behaviors and ideas instead of relying on his promise. And I just think if we take nothing else away from the story of Abraham and his journey through really his faith, we just watched Abraham's faith grow to someone who had to try to think quick on his own feet, lie about his wife being his sister to make sure he stayed safe, to taking on another wife and trying to have a child in a way that was outside of what God had said. To then we see him really exercise beautiful faith when he took Isaac to the mountain to be sacrificed in this test that he knew. He had faith. He knew. He told his servants, we'll be back. And he told Isaac, God will provide the ram in your place. And God did. Abraham knew. Abraham developed that kind of faith that even in the face of terrifying trials, that he knew God's promises were real. And so we all need to remember that God's promises are real. And I do continue to offer up prayer for the righteous, prayers of protection and of peace, and to just stand united in calling out terror and destruction and just disgusting behavior for what it is. while also reminding us all that there will be a day where there will be no more tears and no more violence, right? That's what the scripture said. The violence will be gone and the light will come. And those are the days that we're looking forward to. So, on that note, we're going to look over at Hebrews 11 and just kind of continue this theme of faith. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the convictions of things not seen. For by it, the people of old received their commendation. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen is not made out of the things that are visible. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through faith, though he died, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death. And he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned by God for concerning events yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this, he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith, Abraham obeyed. So his belief caused action, right? When he was called out to go to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. And there you see the author of Hebrews pointing out that Abraham lived with Isaac and Jacob. So they knew each other. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. And these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus must make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared them a city. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead. Right? Abraham knew whatever God wants here, he's going to fulfill his promise. From which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of his sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave them directions concerning his bones. So we see a motif here, even about raising from the dead, thinking about what the faith and the promise includes. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. And this phrase, be made perfect, really it's be fulfilled, completed, get to the goal, or made perfect. What is the author of Hebrews talking about here? It's about the resurrection. It's about what we're looking for at the end of time, where instead of the second death, that we are resurrected in life to spend eternity with our King in the city he has made for us to dwell with us forever, right? So this faith that inspires and requires action is all about believing what is to come. The promises that are here but not yet, now but also to come, that we know we are waiting for these things to be fulfilled in our Messiah, in Jesus. And all of these forefathers of faith, they knew the promise too. And though they died not seeing it yet, right? They'll see it when we do, not apart from us, but when we do at the end of time, at the resurrection. And so it's just really a reminder to it's a reminder to look ahead to the future, to what we're promised in the kingdom to come, that we believe in a resurrection, that we believe in eternity. We believe in a promised land that are promised to the children of Abraham, right? To the children of Abraham. And we'll continue to pray for peace in this land, in the land that God has chosen for his people. We'll continue to pray for peace. But we know true peace won't come until God is the one reigning and ruling. And we need to remember that we can't force God's promises, because when we do, we usually create a mess. So we're going to end on that note, and thank you for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, give me your feedback, questions, comments. Share this if you found it valuable. And I will see you next week. We'll also do a helpful Hebrew connected to this week's portion, so keep an eye out for that. And then the next portion is Toldot, Generations, where we'll get back into the rest of the story about what's really going on with Jacob and Esau and the whole dressing up, and it's a lot. Join me next week to talk about that, and I'll see you then.